Greetings and welcome to the Destination Goa Trends podcast, bringing in-depth interviews with artists, label people, organizers from the golden age of the 90s to the modern era. My name is Simon Peter and I'm here with the one and only Tibus.
Hey yo, it's time to talk about Goa Trends. But before we do that, let me remind you to hit the like button and share the show so that new people can tune in. Peter, what do you think of Doof's second album, It's About Time?
I think it's one of the hidden gems of the genre. It was certainly a shift from the classic Goa trance sound of the first album, so I think most old school fans skipped it, but it's still very much rooted in trance, very psychedelic, but different from the ultra-polished modern psytrance sound.
Yeah, I think some of those early progressive tracks are on par with the best progressive tracks from that era. And I really like the second half, the dubby half of the record. But I really enjoy Nick's later musical output as well, because he released a couple of excellent ambient albums in the 2010s. And a couple of years ago, he also had an album where he mixed acid house with ambient, and that's just awesome.
In the second episode with Nick, we discussed what he did after 2000, all his projects and albums, as well as his appearance at ZNA. Let's dive in.
Thanks for joining again for the second part of this interview, where we go deep into what happened after the Goa trance years, so mainly the early 2000s and afterwards. Last time we left off with the album, and of course the album ends with The Star Above Parvati, which is a great segue to our first topic. So after the album was released, you released mostly down-tempo dub tracks. Baba We Love Dub So, Skang on Planet Dub, High on Mountain Kailash. There's nothing dated as yesterday's future. Where does your fascination with dub and down-tempo music come from?
That's a great question. Before we get into that, I wanted to make two corrections from our chat last week, which have been rattling around in my head since we last spoke. So the first one was about the Synesthesiacs recording, which I had said I think it was with Mark Allen, but I did a little bit of digging back into that, and I think that you guys were correct that it was with Crispo. At least as far as anything I can find online, that might be an unreliable memory of mine. So maybe you guys were right about that one. It certainly looks that way. And I know Crispo was also involved with Phantasm, which was the label that went out on. So I wanted to just clear that up. And also that I had said that Doof in German meant deaf, and I was wrong about that. Probably, maybe you guys already realized that, no? But it kind of means more like stupid, right? Or dumb, something like that.
Yes. I was editing the previous episode last weekend, and I listened to it again, and I realized that in Dutch it actually means deaf.
So maybe it was Dutch I was thinking of, and then all right, that clears up because, yeah, great, thank you, thanks for reminding me about that. So in Dutch, deaf, and then because I remember. It has also a meaning in German, but it's slightly different, like kind of dumb or stupid, which is also pretty funny, actually. Anyway, so yeah, I'm a somewhat unreliable source for my own life history, but but to get back to the question, dub and that down-tempo dubby style is something that I just had been personally listening to and enjoying since I was a teenager, really. And, it's a strong musical thread in UK culture. Obviously, we have a history with the West Indies, Caribbean. A lot of those people came here in the 50s. There's big areas of the country, big communities of people. And of course, they brought their music with them. And that became, a strong part of UK musical culture, sound system culture in the days before, rave sound systems. The reggae sound systems were, there for many, many years. And, big part of the, Notting Hill, history, Notting Hill Carnival, all that, having the sound systems out on the street. And they were also, like, along with the punk scene in the 70s, you know, Don Letts is a famous DJ and sort of man of culture here in the UK, and he used to DJ at the Roxy, where a lot of the early punk bands would play. The Damned, Clash, Sex Pistols would play at the Roxy, and Don Letts would spin dub in between the punk bands. And I was a punk fan, like probably the first music that like really I could really claim for my own was the punk bands. And so I already was a little bit along with that, even though I was just, you know, still a kid back then, probably 12, 13 years old, something like that, when I started to hear that kind of music. Dub is something that was always kind of there for me. And even though it's a little bit underground culture in the UK, I didn't really hear anything, you know, being played in terms of the mainstream culture, but I would hear stuff from friends, and I would go up to London and I'd buy records. And I think I mentioned last time that this Aswad album, A New Chapter of Dub, was a big influence on me in the sort of mid to late 80s, which is, I guess, when that came out, mid 80s, I'm guessing. And that was probably the first album that I heard that really turned me on to the idea that, you know, the studio could be a performance in itself, or another, you know, instrument at the producer's fingertips. So so then when I was making music, I was still listening to dub, and obviously there's a flip side to the party scene, which is that there was always a chill out. At least in those days, there was always an area where you would go to, like, you know, chill. Those rooms had their own musical culture, obviously. And so when I was making kind of electronic, psychedelic music, it always seemed to me a natural fit, that those tempos, those rhythms, those sort of trippy sound effects would cross over very easily with the you know, electronic music audience. You know, trying to find a way to fit that in, and sort of find a way to marry up those two things. So, and at the time I wasn't aware. I mean, I'm sure there were scenes of that music already and people doing that kind of thing, but I wasn't hearing a lot of it myself. You know, it became a whole kind of genre in itself. But at the time, there wasn't much, you know, Sybient kind of. There was bits and bobs, but it was something that was sort of, just starting off, I would say.
I think one of the first releases was maybe the Infinity Project album, not the Mystical Experiences, but the other one. Forgot. Or maybe is it the Mystical Experiences?
It might even be, that might have been the first one, actually.
Yeah, that one is definitely an ambient album, ambient version of their stuff. But yeah, many artists had like at least one track at the end of the album that was a chill out track, but it took some time until it came into a thing of its own, and it became like a genre within the psychedelic scene.
Right. I think back in the early days, like in the chill out room, people were playing all sorts of whatever they could grab that they thought would kind of fit the vibe of the room. And then obviously that became more and more artists started to feed into that and create a lot of, now there's tons of amazing music in that genre.
High on Mountain Kailash appeared on the Mysteries of Yeti Part 2. It's probably the most atmospheric track on that record. We have talked with Stefan from Total Eclipse. He explained how the first Mysteries of the Yeti was made. But can you give some insights how this album come together? Did Roger give you some instructions regarding the tracks or any direction, or it was more of just a compilation of long ambient tracks?
No, he did. And it was definitely, had a concept behind it, that album. And funnily enough, actually, funny timing, but just a few days ago, I was clearing out a drawer with a bunch of papers in, and I found the page that he drew and gave me for the concept for the album, which was the Mount Kailash shape and then split into all these different layers, and then each layer was a track, and it was kind of like he had a whole trip about, like, you know, ascending to the top of Mount Kailash, and it was like a whole thing. It was definitely a whole thing, and it was like, this is going to be the concept of the album, and everybody was, you know, had their little slice of the cake, as it were, to contribute to the overall journey. But I wasn't really too much aware of what any of the other artists were doing or contributing until their tracks were handed in. I just went away and worked on my own little piece of the, you know, the overall thing. But yeah, but Raj, you know, it was Raj's idea for sure, and he had a very clear idea of what he wanted for that album.
And you also had a project with Simon, the Nomads of Dub. How do you remember those tracks you did?
Well, the Nomads of Dub, that came out of just messing around with Simon in his home studio in Battersea and wanting to do some more down tempo stuff. And at the time, as part of my, you know, videotaping weird stuff off the TV to try to get samples from, they just showed this documentary in the UK, A Bad Trip at Edgewood, I think it's called, or A Bad Trip to Edgewood, or Bad Trip at Edgewood, which then disappeared for years. And I think probably you can find it online these days, so you must be able to. Everything's on YouTube. But at the time, it was this thing that, you know, like, also this was in the days when things were shown on TV once and then it was gone and you never saw it again. There was no like on demand or anything like that. So if you missed it, you missed it. But they showed this documentary which was about, you know, the MK Ultra dosing US soldiers on this military base with LSD to see what would happen back in the days when they were trying to work out if they could make CIA, US government was trying to work out if they could make LSD some kind of, you know, biological warfare weapon and gain some sort of battlefield advantage with dosing enemy soldiers with LSD. And so they, a lot of this footage had been dug up and was put into a documentary. And so we had, so I had this tape and Simon and I were going through and we just picked a couple of choice samples out of that documentary of some poor, you know, post-traumatic psychedelic soldier explaining what happened to him when they overdosed him on LSD in these covert experiments, and talking about spirals of glittering colors unwinding. You know, it was like, poor guy was never the same again, but it was a great sample. So we nicked it, and that was probably the little seed that, you know, we had that sample and we were like, let's build something around this. And then we also had this little Boss, I remember we had a Boss Echo pedal, guitar pedal, battery powered guitar pedal, and that had had it like a speed control on it for the echoes, so you could tweak the speed of the echoes. So we did a lot of that in those Nomads tracks, of like winding up the echoes and slowing them down and just trying to get kind of, you know, a bit loose with that kind of dubby echo style. And then I think at some point Simon and I had talked about doing, you know, making that like a little side project, Nomads of Dub, and that was going to be something that we did more tracks for. And yeah, just never happened. Too much other stuff going on. So it only ended up being just even several mixes of one track, basically, was the Nomads thing.
So you did have some tracks that you were like kind of left half finished, but
no, it was more just an idea of like, we should do more of this stuff. Like, let's do a down tempo project. Let's do some more Nomads of Dub. Also, I like the name, so it seemed like a nice project to continue with. But it was just an idea, and for whatever reason, we never got round to it.
But you did have another collaboration with Benji Won and Citizen Kent. or Canes,
Citizen Kane's, yeah.
and Mod Spirit, I think. So for a couple of tracks, you also collaborated with him.
That's right.
How was that?
That was awesome. Like, I loved working with Benji. He is super talented guy and super creative. And we were just both hanging around at that point. I think Twisted Records was already a thing. Maybe it was just before that, a while that was just happening. But we were kind of in a similar circle of friends that we'd all been in Ibiza one summer together, staying in the same house. Actually, I was staying in the house with Benji. And at some point during that summer, I think, the idea came up like, oh, we should do something together. Let's do some tracks together. So that's what the Citizen Kane stuff came out of. But I did those tracks were all done at Benji's place in his studio. And so he really took the majority of the production kind of credits for those ones, because we were there, we were co-creating, but it was his studio, his space. He was basically riding the computer, and it was super fun. I really enjoyed working with Benji, and I like those tracks. They're like a little bit different style again. They're not trance tracks. They found a place on Twisted releases, but then shortly after that, Benji started working with Simon. So
yeah, that's I guess how Simon's projects with the Spongle and Younger Brother started around those time. That is still consuming most of his time, I guess, these days. So yeah,
absolutely.
The next Doof album, It's About Time, was released in 2000. This time on Simon's Twisted Records, actually. So what does the title refer to?
It's, again, I love a double meaning. So it refers in one way to kind of second album syndrome, like the tough second album, as it were. Like, bands coming up or whatever, people coming up, they collect these tracks together and they have their first album nice and solid. Then you've done that, you're over that, you're on to the next thing. And then it's like, okay, so what's going on the second album? and it took a while to put together. So one meaning of that title is it was about time for another Doof release. It's about time. It's like, come on, it's been enough time past. Let's have another Doof album. But it's also got maybe like a little bit more of a trippy, psychedelic, like it's about time, as in, cosmic questions and reality, existence. What does that have to do with time? What is time? How does time, how do we experience time? It's kind of, more like philosophical questions, let's say. It's about time. You could say existence is about time, in the sense that the way we experience three-dimensional existence is dependent on time as a dimension. So just the way we experience it as humans, that is, it's like time is a necessary part of that. So it's about time is also like maybe, our lives, our human experience from one point of view is about time.
And can you explain the cover? Because I couldn't figure out what's on it, actually.
Well, it's another Mark Neal cover. We did the first one together. So I went back to him and I wanted to do something. I had an idea that I wanted to do something not so much with like computer generated trippy patterns or like a digital thing, but I was like, I want to find some trippy shapes in nature. And let's find a trippy, like a fractal. I had a book which I'd bought years before called Fractals in Nature. And it was just all photographs of natural, plants, rocks, whatever, objects that were basically had a fractal form. So, and I loved that book, and I wanted to do something with that. Basically, I wanted to do something that was trippy and fractal, but that was from nature. And that's the cover we ended up with. I'm not sure. I don't remember now what was the thinking behind that being the image that we went with. I think I've got a vague memory that I initially worked with another graphic designer that Twisted had put me in touch with. And I'd given him this book, Fractals in Nature. And I was like, I gave it to him for some inspiration. I was like, I want to do something like the pictures in this book. And then that guy like disappeared and he took the book with him and I never saw it again. And then when I went to Mark Neal, I was like, I was trying to explain to him this idea that I had. And then I think we were looking around for images and somehow we settled on that one. And then Mark also came up with the font, the different Doof like font. That was Mark Neal, basically. He found that. I would have gone again with the Doof like infinity symbol, like more like, fat, cartoony. But there was I think there was a bit of a feeling of like, no, let's do something different. And Mark found that font from somewhere. And I just kind of rolled with that. Yeah, so that's where the idea for that cover came from. And I think it never really was quite the idea that I had in mind. It was a little bit of a compromise.
It's really not the usual cover for an electronic album, not just.
But then it wasn't a usual album either. And that's kind of the issue slightly with that one.
Speaking of Twisted, how did you end up on Twisted? Because we talked about that, how you ended up on Tip Records for the first one.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest, Tip had first option on that second Doof album. And I went to Tip first of all, and I had those tracks all together. And I went and I sat in a room with Raj, and I think Serge was there, maybe from Total Eclipse, or maybe I'm mixing that up with another occasion. But Raj, or maybe Raj and Rich was there because he was A&Ring for Tip at that time. I think Rich was there, and maybe Serge was wandering in and out. Anyway, he was around. But so I played them, and they were like, "Okay, here we go, next Doof album, let's hear it." And we played it through, and then after the last track finished, there was just like one of those moments of silence. And they were like, And they didn't really like it. They passed on it. They were like, we don't think this is going to work on Tip. Not trancey enough. I think they were really wanting and expecting a kind of repeat of the first album. And in my awkward and inconvenient way, I'd already kind of moved on, and I wanted to kind of do something a bit different. And that was the collection of tracks that I had right then. But yeah, and so they didn't think it was a fit for Tip. But then Twisted were more than happy to step in and take it. So that's the way that happened.
Yeah, it's a bit ironic for me that I think the first time I ever heard Dawn of a New Era was on the Liquid Crystal Vision movie, which was about the kind of a documentary about psychedelic trance. And it was Raj talking about how the psychedelic movement is not something frivolous. It's not something just for your own enjoyment. It's actually changing the consciousness of our world and stuff like that. And right under that sentence, when he was like being interviewed, the track was mixed under his speech. So it was like in my memory, and I was looking for that track for a long time before I actually found that this is a Doof track. Oh, okay. And then this whole album actually has a kind of a different vibe, a bit more minimalistic, a bit more kind of in the style of the era. So contemporary psytrance these days are also more minimalistic, and that was kind of the first wave of this more minimalist sound, maybe we could call. But there is still something uniquely playful, like this Doof sound is still there, I think, in these up-tempo tracks. So why did you, what was your influence in changing up your style at the time? Were you just going with the mood or was it the technology changing? What was the reason behind it?
Yeah, I mean, going with the mood really is the, that's kind of what I've always done. I've always had this thing of just trying to follow my my interest, my inspiration, and my heart in what I creatively try to produce. And probably the smart move at that point would have been to produce another banging trance album and consolidate the success of the first, Doof brand kind of thing. But just at that point in my life, I was, I guess, moving towards like more of a down. I was listening to a lot more down tempo stuff, and I was moving towards that, wanting to make that kind of music a little bit. And so that album is a little bit transitional. Like it's a bridge between, let's say, the first Doof album and then later more down tempo stuff that came afterwards. So yeah, but I kind of, I knew that people were expecting, not people necessarily listening to the music, but let's say labels that I was working with were expecting something more dance floor oriented. So I tried to put a couple of those tracks on there, but somehow, yeah, they were, I guess at that point I was listening to maybe more like what was then called kind of progressive or something like that, like a little bit more of a, as you say, like a minimal kind of groovy sound. And so Last Half of Forever and, Dawn of a New Era were more dance floor oriented, but it wasn't for the trance dance floor. It didn't really work at that point on the trance dance floor. But I mean, I played those tracks at ZNA, a couple of years ago, and they worked great on the dance floor. It was blasting, it was nice, but it was nice in the journey of a set, of a Doof set, where like that was the lighter kind of moment. It was like kind of sunshine kind of part of the set, and then going into those tracks and then back into more like full on stuff. Then it works. But and then there's a couple of more, more like experimental 4/4 things, and then the full on ambient stuff. But at that point I was also a friend of mine, Jasper Edwards, who is the Dub Mission guy. So we were, hanging out a lot together, and he's like he was my like ambient like guru, basically, Jasper. And so he was turning me on to a lot of stuff, a lot of the Fax, Pete Namlook ambient stuff, long 20-minute, 30-minute tracks. And that was exciting for me at the time. I was like, wow, this is, because I was also a stoner, and so I would love to just, listen to this. It wasn't all about pumping the dance floor, for me. There were, like, most times of my life, it was really hanging out in the living room alone or with friends or with girlfriend and listening to atmospheric, cool music that more often than not was down tempo and was just for like chilling and relaxing. And so at that point I was like, yeah, it's exciting for me to try to do something along those lines, like, Yesterday's Future and those longer form ambient tracks.
Yeah, I just double checked myself, and it was indeed Home on the Strange that was featured in the Liquid Crystal Vision.
Home on the, yeah, okay, all right. So that's really not a very dance floor track, but that's more of that was a track. I remember struggling with that track, and I had some parts and I had some bits, and I was like, how am I gonna, like, I wasn't sure how to put those puzzle pieces together into an arrangement and tried to make a track out of it. So that was like really trying to bridge some sort of a gap between like a 4/4 like dancey thing and like a more of a down tempo, like chill out room, or just hanging out in the living room with friends, like chilling and having that on in the background. And it's closer really to the stuff I've been doing much more recently, up to date, like the down tempo 4/4 stuff. So that was the first 2 tracks on the on It's About Time were some kind of an attempt to bring the 4/4 like dancey beat like down into more of a not exactly ambient, but yeah, like a chill out down tempo kind of.
Contemporary progressive albums like Atmos's Head Cleaner, I think, is also something that people rather listen at home, and it's not that dance floor oriented. I mean, it works on the dance floor, but I think it's more for listening at home on your couch and enjoying the delays and delays, and on top of that, more delays.
Yeah. I mean, I think those, the music that can be enjoyed in that way, in a way, has a longer shelf life. I mean, there are classic dance tracks, of course, but, they're for a particular moment. But those tracks you can, they're easy to get along with, they can be more part of your, like, not to say that dance music isn't part of daily life, but I find the tracks that I tend to go back to over the years are those tracks that, you want to listen to just while you're home or in the car or whatever. Like,
and as you said with the ZNA set, if you play those tracks at the right moment, maybe at the beginning of a set or as kind of a transition, I think it's perfect. I, for instance, opened the set this time during the summer at the Apsara Festival with your track, actually, the second Revelation from the Mystery of the 13 Crystal Skulls, which was funnily on tip, but it was already kind of in this newer style.
That was the time, yeah. It is, yeah. It's in that style of and in fact, I think probably the reason that it wasn't on that, or maybe it was after that album, I'm not sure. It was around that time. Yeah, I don't remember exactly the chronology, but yeah. You're totally right. It's in that style. Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about that track, and someone mentioned it to me, I think after the ZNA thing, and they were like, "Oh, you didn't play that one," and I was like, "Oh, that one." For some reason, it'd gone completely out of my head, and I thought it was like, wasn't that an ambient one? I was thinking it was one of those like Mystery of the Yeti tracks. Totally forgot, and went back and listened to it, and I was like, "Wow, this is nice." I have to say, I was like pleasantly surprised when I went back and heard it. I thought it was a nice one, that track.
Speaking of the down-tempo tracks, I just want to know, what are the dark secrets of the Manky Fudge Pocket?
Well, if I was to say the secret here, then it would no longer be a secret. That may have to remain a secret, the dark secret of the Manky Fudge Pocket. That actually came from there was a line that I lifted out of a TV show called Asylum, which was a comedy show that was showing late night in the UK about an asylum that was like all the inmates were comedians who a lot of whom were getting their first break on TV and went on to become quite famous. So Simon Pegg was in that show, who went on to star in the Mission Impossible movies with Tom Cruise and become a famous Hollywood guy. And Julian Barrett, who went on to become half of the Mighty Boosh. I don't know if you know those guys, but they were like quite a big comedy act here in the UK back in the early 2000s. He was in that show as well. And it was a line someone had said in the show about somebody else being insane and talking rubbish, and they had said they came out with that line and they were like, "Oh, you'd probably just say it was like the dark secrets of the Manky Fudge Pocket." And I was like, whoa, that is a beautiful line. That's poetry right there. It's like it just had a nice rhythm. It was juicy, it was chewy. Dark secrets of the Manky. Yeah, I just thought that went into my little notebook, and I was like, maybe one day I'll use that. Yeah, so that's where that comes from. But the secret may never be revealed, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, people need to listen to the track to uncover the secrets.
There you go.
Once you started moving towards this newer, more progressive direction, some other projects came about, particularly the one that you did with Sally Fermi and Javier folks with the Vatos Locos guys.
Vatos, yeah. Well, that came out of us all hanging out in Mexico together. The Javi obviously is Mexican, and he had a nightclub called Espiral in Playa del Carmen, which was just south of Cancun on the Ruta Maya there in the southern peninsula of Mexico. And I had gone there for one of the entheogenic conferences that they used to do back in the day when Terence McKenna used to show up to talk, and Sasha Shulgin was there, and a bunch of the, like basically the psychedelic kind of Illuminati would show up to these conferences and present talks and lectures, and people would hang out. And so they used to do them quite regularly in Palenque, Chiapas, and then one year they shifted that to Uxmal, which was in the Yucatan. And that was the year I happened to be there. And that's not far from Playa del Carmen. So after the conference, I went, some buddies of mine from Ibiza had said, like, oh, if you're in Mexico, you should go to Playa del Carmen. There's this crazy guy there. Like, you should hook up with him. He's got a nightclub, and, you guys will get along, like, great. And so I was like, yeah, okay, I'll go and check it out. And so met Javi, and yeah, we did indeed get along great and became, best buddies, and still are to this day. One of my best friends in the world. And so those Vatos tracks came out of us hanging out in Mexico, basically, which we did for a while in the winter months. And then later on, Chelly also, who was, good buddy of mine from Ibiza, we were sharing a place together for quite a while, making music together. And then when we were all in Mexico together, we started, as you do, making some tunes and playing them out in the parties that we were playing there. And then gradually we came up with the name, which was from a funny, like, movie about LA gang culture. The Vatos Locos was like a Mexican gang in LA, this kind of like cheesy B movie we'd seen all together there in Mexico, and then we came back to Ibiza, and then worked in Ibiza over a summer on the rest of the tracks for that first Vatos album. So we rented a place all together and set up a little studio, and then made tracks, which was so much fun. That was just like one of the best summers ever in Ibiza for me. We had another little side project together, the third year audio, which was basically that album came out of the time when Chelly and I were sharing a house in Ibiza and had our little joint studio set up there. And it was like the in between producing kind of dance floor tracks, trance tracks, we were coming up, like, again with the down tempo kind of thing, and then gradually got together an album's worth of stuff. And I love that album. I love that third year. I think it's really, for me, it stands up still today, even though it's quite some years old. That's one I can go back and listen to and not feel, like, this hasn't aged well or whatever. I think that one stands up still for me anyway.
And I think you draw the cover of that as well, right?
Yeah, it's a painting. Yeah, it's a painting.
I think you have your own unique style, actually. It's, if you look at the picture, you recognize that's
the clouds and the smoke kind of backgrounds are, I think, recognizable pretty much. Yeah.
That was another album that didn't have a cover, and we didn't really know what to do for the cover. So I think it was just at some point suggested just go away and make a painting of some kind, and we'll use that. And so, yeah, that's how that one came about. Yeah, I love that album. And I love working with Chelly as well. It was so much fun.
And I think you also did Beloved Dubso as well, that figure that is on there, right?
Yeah, that's one of mine. Yeah, the little melting head with the kind of butterfly ears.
Yeah, and you actually did another album as Vatos Locos together with Javier as Attack and Release was the second album in 2004 that came out on Dragonfly. But after that, the project kind of ended, or are you guys still collaborating on anything these days?
No, not really. You know, Javi moved to Canada. Chelly's super busy guy, has his projects going on. Yeah, we all just kind of ended up being in different parts of the world. And I think I dropped out of Vatos, and Javi and Chelly continued it for a while, just the two of them. And they made some tracks together for Attack and Release. I think Acid Maria I wasn't involved with. There's a couple of tracks on that record that album that I was not a part of. So it's really Chelly and Javi. So I'd already kind of dropped out by that point. Yeah, I guess that's that was starting to overlap with the next kind of chapter of my kind of musical journey, where I was kind of dropped out of the electronic scene in general. So I think that's why that Vatos, didn't continue in that way. But it's a funny story with the first Vatos album, Welcome to the Barrio, because that got picked up by Sony in Mexico. That was through Javi, because he had connections in Mexico City, and somehow there weren't many, Mexican domestic, like electronic acts, or at least not that were, had come to the awareness of Sony music, let's say. So somehow, in this bizarre quirk of fate, Javi had got our album played to the A&R department at Sony, and they were like, yeah, we like it, we're gonna release the album. So suddenly we had this like brush with mainstream music. I mean, they had Jessica Simpson on Sony Music. It was that kind of world, It was like proper mainstream pop. They were thinking, well, maybe we can sell these guys to the Mexican public as some kind of, I don't know what they thought. So that was happening. So then we got involved with this kind of major label thing in Mexico City. And then it was, we were all there, all three of us were there, like doing press. It was never going to be a good fit, basically. Personally, it made me very uncomfortable. Like, I didn't think that they had any clue, like, what any of this was about at all, or what was the background of it, like what was trance or trance parties or any of that stuff. Like, there was just like, they were not even that interested, to be honest, in anything. They were just like, well, here's this, maybe we can sell this, So we had this like very funny. There was one evening in Mexico City, so Sony invited us down to do this showcase, which was an evening where all their acts that they had signed for the upcoming like 6 months or year or whatever it was, they would perform in this club for all the buyers in Mexico. So like the radio guys would come down, like the people who were buying in for like music stores, other affiliates of Sony. Like it was it was their chance to like showcase their artists. So they were like, you guys should come down and do this. So we were like, well, what are we going to do? Because we don't really perform. I mean, we're just three guys with some synths, and we just like DJ or whatever. So they're like, no, it'll be fine. We'll get you a keyboard, and we'll put it on a stand in the middle of the stage, and then you just give us a CD with your track, Welcome to the Barrio, and we're going to play it. And you guys just have fun on stage, just like jump around, whatever, pretend to play the keyboard. It'll be great. So then we show up for this thing, and sure enough, like there are a bunch of acts playing that evening, and they're like super professional. I mean, you can like, these are guys who are really like trying to make it in the commercial like music world. So they've got all the choreographed dance moves, they've got like the costumes, the makeup, you know, they're putting on a show, you know, like, and then so we rock up on the stage like, you know, in whatever clothes we'd thrown on that morning, and so then so they put this keyboard on the stage. I don't think it was even plugged in. And then the three of us had to stand there. And so the track started playing. And it's like, you know, welcome to the barrier, whatever. And we're like jumping around. It played through for like, I guess, 3/4 of the track, something like that. And then at some point, while we were there on stage, the CD got stuck. It was like, it did one of those. And then we were just like on stage, you know, like what just happened? And the CD was just like jig 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 jig, and the guy just like, whoever was in the, you know, like taking care of the sound, he just like faded it out to nothing. And then we just like walked off the stage. It went so badly. I mean, it could not have been worse. Basically, it was a truly embarrassing moment. Funny enough, my son asked me the other day. He was like, tell me something. Can you tell me like a moment when you were really embarrassed? And I was racking my mind trying to think of something. But that story, that's a moment when I was like truly embarrassed to be on the stage. And like, no, I don't think anybody even applauded. Like they didn't even know like what was going on. They were just like, just get these guys off the stage and we'll get to the next act. It just couldn't have gone worse, basically. So yeah, so Sony didn't pick us up for a second album. But it was a funny like brush with the mainstream music world for the Vatos Locos.
Yeah, that's an interesting story, really. I was just checking like the dance division sub-label of Sony that had the album released, and yeah, those acts, as far as I can remember, they were the typical kind of sing-along, dance-along, commercial electronic music. Had nothing to do with our scene, basically. So that's really funny.
No, sure. It wasn't a good fit. But it was a fun experience.
Yeah, but interestingly, if we can believe what Wikipedia is saying, that around this time you got kind of disillusioned with the Psytrance scene anyway. I mean, probably after the Vatos Locos project started to fade out, then you started moving more toward dub and ambient and less up-tempo, as I understand. Was there any particular moment that made you decide that you're not going to produce up-tempo tracks anymore for a while, or you just turn your back on the scene and do your own thing, or what was happening at the time?
I don't think there wasn't a particular moment that I can think of, but I felt it was around the transitional time when, you know, what is Psytrance today was just starting to become, you know, the dominant kind of sound and it was like the Goa trance thing was kind of morphing into this other thing, and it just didn't speak to me the same way. That music, like, it's a great scene today, and obviously a lot of people love it dearly. A lot of the artists that started off in making Goa trance transitioned to become Psytrance people and kept up with that scene, and I couldn't come along on that journey. Like, it just wasn't speaking to me personally, and obviously no disrespect to any part of the Psytrance scene. It wasn't speaking to me. So, you know, in that shift, a lot of things were changing then in the scene, and maybe it was becoming a little bit more defined what the scene was. The music was like there had been elements of the Psytrance sound earlier on in the Goa thing, but there was a particular strand that started to be picked out that was like, you know, this like a blasting, like powerful sound. And then it was like somehow if a track didn't blast, it wasn't like cutting it. And obviously the earlier Goa stuff, there are like blasting tracks, but I felt it was like a little bit of a softer sound somehow, like I don't know really how to describe it. It's like it's still a psychedelic sound, but maybe not pushing quite so hard somehow. As I could see the scene changing, I was losing interest in it. It was never anything to do with the scene becoming more commercial or anything like that. Like I don't have a problem with that. It was strictly about the music for me. And like, is this music I want to make? Is this music I want to listen to? Is this music I want to dance to on the dance floor? And, just personally, I didn't feel that. And so, my musical interest went in another direction. And I was already, like kind of moving towards this slightly down tempo sound anyway. So I was moving in a different direction.
It's interesting because sometimes when this topic comes up, like how in the early 2000s, the psytrance sound just changed, that some attribute this more to like aesthetics or kind of like an approach to music making. There was also a shift in technology around the time. Obviously, it's evolving all the time, but like DAWs, like computer-driven editing, sound editing was becoming more prevalent, I guess, around that time. So what do you think was the key driver of the change? Do you think it was really purely aesthetic, that people were trying to one-off each other with who can do that kind of heavy pumping sound better, or was it because of the technology became more accessible to people?
It's a hard question to answer. I don't know if I have the answer to that. I mean, there's always a bit of a one-upping thing not necessarily in a bad way, of like somebody makes a track, someone else hears it and it's like, yeah, I like that, but I think, I could even like do it better, stronger, harder, like whatever it is, do more of it. Turn it up another notch, which is no bad thing, like that's pushing creativity forward. I think the technology was changing. Things were starting to move more in the box, like more digital based, like people were using digital plugins, digital soft synths were starting to sound usable around that time. It was still early days for soft synths, but that was starting to be something so that very clean sound, like super low noise floor, the old analog days of producing with synths in the studio through a mixing desk, and whatever effects you had, like the noise floor was pretty high, basically. The background hiss, let's say, which gives it its own kind of flavor. And also, like, hardly anybody had compressors back in those days, like hardware compressors. Maybe, if you really knew what you were doing, someone like Martin from Man With No Name, you worked in a studio with a compressor and you knew how to use it on your kick drum, and you'd get like a solid thumping. But most of the guys that I worked with at home, including Cy Posford, I mean, he didn't own a compressor at the point when we were producing tracks in his studio, and no one really thought like, what we need is a compressor. Like it was more of an organic sound. So then, as things moved into the box, and a lot of people had the Waves plugins, because that was an early set of plugins that was cracked basically online, so you could get them for free, like on the sketchy web. In the Waves suite of plugins, they had decent compressors and sound maximizers and limiters. And so once people got their hands on those, I think that changed the sound, because people could really push the loudness and also just the impact of the kick and the bass and all that. And it started to create this, what became, the modern psytrance sound. So it was partly it was the technology, but also I think it was just natural feedback of dance floors as well, of like, the tracks that were popular and that people responded to on the dance floor, other artists noticed that and they were like, okay, let's do something like the crowd loves that, so let's do more of that. Let's give the people what they want. And then I think like part of it maybe is the fact that electronic music, and as a subgenre of electronic music, dance music had become so super defined down into micro genres of like, okay, like this is that and this is that, and if it's not like this, then it's not that. It's like if it is not like this, it's no longer psytrance. Suddenly you're making progressive, or you're making trance, like a different kind of trance, like Tiesto trance or something, or it's house, or it's, I don't know, like the genres got so strictly defined that what qualified as psytrance became like very strict, and it was like, okay, it's like this. Whereas back in the old days, you could get away with a lot on the dance floor if you felt that the track was right for a particular moment. No one was coming and saying like, oh, you're not playing my thing, you're not playing the right music. But then I think there was a little bit of a thing with of people from the crowd saying like, this isn't what I paid to hear, like I showed up to hear psytrance and I don't want to hear. So then that becomes like a rigid definition. I mean, I feel like I'm on thin ice here because it's not my scene. I don't want to piss people off, because I know people, they love psytrance and that's great. But it's not my thing. I think it's a combination of all those factors and more, probably other stuff I'm not also thinking of, that fed into creating the scene as it exists today, and the sound, the sound of psytrance.
I think the segmentation of these styles also killed the experimentation, which is snake biting its own tail, that people nowadays, they are afraid of experimenting because they want to have possibilities to release their music, to play at parties. Yeah, it's problematic. And also I think that nowadays everything sounds the same because now everybody has access to top-notch production, because you just need a good sounding sound card. But I like that in the 90s and even in the early 2000s, the sound of the records were also defining their records, and they were sounding good, but you could definitely distinguish between an Atmos track or between a Doof track or between A Man With No Name just because of its sound. And they all sounded great. They all were nice on the dance floor, but they had some kind of dirt to them, unique dirt from the recording process that added to it. And I really, really miss that from today's music.
I agree. I think that's true. I mean, but I no disrespect either to psytrance production techniques and to producers, because the standard of the quality of production that I hear on the psytrance that I hear is like, it's up there, man. I mean, it's super impressive. Like it's not the style that speaks to me, but I can totally appreciate the quality of the production in the psytrance sound. I mean, it's consistently good across like most things that I hear. So I mean, I'm full respect to the people producing those tracks, but I hear what you're saying, and I don't know enough about the scene to know whether I would be able to tell different producers apart, because I'm not plugged into it in that way. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I imagine that might be true for me too.
Your career shifted to acoustic medicine music, and you did 2 albums, Clear Blue Sky and Seeds. Can you tell a little bit about the inspiration for these records and what's your opinion on these albums today?
Yeah, well, again, this comes back to my inconvenient habit of like following my inspiration. It probably was not, a move that anybody saw coming after having made electronic music for so long, to go back into this like acoustic thing and to be writing songs and singing. And, you know, even even my own family, they were like, you know, my dad, who was like super, like, you know, he enjoyed all the Doof stuff and he enjoyed listening to the electronic music, like not his scene at all, but, you know, he kind of, after a while, he understood what I was doing, and even he was like, "What's this? Like, what's going on?" Yeah, that's just me following following this crazy muse that I have in this life. You know, I mean, for me, it's all a logical progression, and like all that music follows a clear kind of through line for me, because it's all music that is soundtracking, you know, for me, unique states of consciousness. For me, it's all psychedelic music. It moved into a different form of psychedelic music, but, you know, what those songs were soundtracking was a progression for me of what the electronic music had been soundtracking, in terms of the experiences that I had on the dance floors, of sharing that space with people, of heart opening, of that continued into this other scene. And so that acoustic music was written to soundtrack a different kind of group experience, which was moving more into the realm of plant medicines, ceremonies, you know, shamanic kind of thing. So I'd already kind of dropped out of the trance, Goa trance that was becoming psytrance scene. I was kind of doing some down-tempo electronic stuff. But what eventually happened was a bunch of friends that I had from the old days in Goa and friends from Ibiza, we gradually had discovered, this other thing that was happening, which was ceremonies and that kind of work. And that felt to us at the time, to a bunch of us who'd come from the Goa scene, like that could be the next step on our journeys. I didn't feel like I was, transitioning somehow just me by myself. But, there was a group of us based in Ibiza who started to get more involved in that kind of world. And so that's really where that first album, Clear Blue Sky, that's the context that came out of. I didn't feel so strange for me because, as I said, like when we started talking, like writing songs and playing guitar was kind of what I started off doing. And then I, connected with this scene where that was really the way the night would be soundtracked, was more like live music, live performance, acoustic, often guitar and vocal, but sometimes like tablas mixed in there, or flutes or other instruments. Musicians would come, join in, like it could be like a moving thing, but quite often songs. And then there were songs from the tradition of plant medicine. So there were songs coming from Brazil, a lot of songs in Portuguese, some songs in English. And so the night would be like more, let's say, more of an acoustic kind of event than an electronic event. And so as I transitioned into that kind of scene, I was like, yeah, I want to try and contribute to this, and maybe I can try and contribute with music as I had previously with my electronic stuff. So I started writing some songs, and then songs got played in ceremonies. And in fact, those songs are out there now in the world, basically. They're still getting played in ceremonies. Most people don't know where they come from. They get played in like rainbow gatherings, ceremonies all over the world. Like a friend of mine came back from a trip to the Amazon where they'd stayed with some Brazilian community deep in the forest somewhere, like an ayahuasca community, and he was like, yeah man, these guys, they were playing your songs, in the jungle. Like, it's quite amazing to me that some of those songs from that first album, not all of them, but they're like Celestial Heart, Angel Heart, Flower of Light, Clear Blue Sky. Those songs are out there, and people are recording their own versions of them. People are playing them around campfires, in ceremonies, rainbow gatherings, and I'm super proud of that. I've got a feeling, I have a hope that those songs will outlive me. I think they've kind of become part of the songbook, as it were, of kind of medicine music, and the Rainbow Tribe kind of songbook, and that's something I'm super proud of.
After the kind of purely acoustic ventures, you slowly kind of return to electronic music, releasing ambient, kind of beatless stuff as well, with the Kana.
Yeah, exactly. So at this point I was living in Ibiza, and had a little family, had my son. We were all living out there. I was living out in Ibiza with my family, and I was starting to gather together like a few electronic bits and pieces. I had a tiny little room in the house where we were renting in Ibiza. That was my little studio space, and I was kind of like, around 2015, I was starting to get into like some Eurorack, like the modular thing was starting to really interest me. And so I bought a little case and I got some modules, and I was messing around with that in Ibiza. And then that was around the time that Bruce Parry contacted me to work on the soundtrack to the Tawai movie. Initially, he thought he wanted something acoustic for that, but eventually he decided he wanted something electronic and very ambient. And so there was a couple of people up for the job, and I had to submit like a reel to him with some scenes that he'd already cut from the movie with my music over the top. And I was super happy that he chose me to take the job on, because I'd never really done any film soundtrack work before. But that was a great project to be a part of. And Bruce was living in Ibiza as well, and cutting the movie there in his place in Ibiza. And it was very much a project of kind of family and friends, a super nice project to work on, and a lot of time spent getting everything right. So that drew me back into electronic music a little bit, because I'd been working again. I think I produced for that film probably 24 hours of music, of which, an hour or so made it into the cut. So I was producing a lot of ambient and different ideas and things to try to fit into the movie. And and enjoying it, getting back into that enjoyment of working with the computer and electronic sounds and all that. And then shortly after that, the Kana album, it's something that happened very quickly, but it was around that same time of living in this house in Ibiza and having just worked on the Tawai movie, I think. And I think, reflective of my life at the time, like there was a great sense of like, I was feeling I was super happy with my little family. I was feeling very content. There was a great sense of like peace and stillness at that time. And so I was producing music that reflected that. And I think that Kana album is trying to reflect a bit of that sense of peace and kind of the stillness, more of a meditative space, but without wanting to be like a meditation album or a kind of, spa kind of background music, but trying to, and it just came out around the time when 2016 when Trump got elected for the first time and everyone was losing their shit about that. And so that felt like a good time to put that out into the world, like to give people a little oasis of calm to inhabit, hopefully.
Speaking of documentary, I just wonder, how did you work on it? Did you have the shots or the concept art or something, and you just or you just imagined the shots and you created the music, or how should we imagine that?
Well, it was a really unusual project to work on because generally what happens is, as far as I understand, the world of composers for movies is that the music's the last thing to go on to the movie. So there'll be an edit and they'll have edited to whatever music they were using just to fill the space while they edit, and then it goes to the composer. And generally without much time to kind of work. So they'll be working, they'll have their cues, but the movie will be more or less cut how it's going to be. And then they'll write to that. But with Tawai, because Bruce was like in the edit for so long, it was much more of a back and forth kind of relationship. So I went in fairly early on in the project and there wasn't even really much cut together at that point. I think they had a few sequences of maybe 5 or 10 minutes that were cut, and a couple of which like lasted all the way through into the final cut. But it was really more of a case of they would send me like maybe like a 5 minutes of something they'd cut together, and they'd be like, write something to go over this. And then it would go back, and then they'd give me feedback, or even the edit might have changed. So there was a lot of back and forth, there was a lot of feedback, there was a lot of sort of trying to find the right direction to go. And Bruce's note at the beginning of the process was he didn't want the soundtrack to be leading the audience to think something or feel something in particular about what they were seeing on the screen. He wanted the music to be very neutral and just hold the atmosphere, but not be telling the audience what to think. And that's actually quite a tricky thing to pull off with music, because generally music does lead you in one direction or another emotionally, and it gives you a cue as to what you should be feeling. And that's generally how music is used in movies. They're like the music gives you the cue of what you should be feeling about what you're seeing on the screen in that moment. And it's easy to prove, when you see the same little snippet of film of someone walking down a street and you play like scary, ominous music, you're like, oh, something bad's going to happen. Or you play like super cheerful, happy music and you think like, oh, this guy's like, it like completely changes your perception of what you see on the screen. So Bruce was like, I don't want the music to be leading the audience. So that was really a lot of the back and forth of how do we do that, and how do we make the music work in a way that he, as the director, was comfortable with and felt like it was doing the job he wanted it to do. So in the end, actually, the way that ended up working was that they would send me a scene and I would write music over the scene, and then they would take that music and they would put it over a different scene. So actually, I wasn't writing music for the scene that it ended up being used on. And in that way, I wasn't subconsciously responding to what I was seeing on the screen and putting into the music. And it kind of, I think, worked. We got close, I think, to what he was trying to achieve with that.
There was a compilation of some dub tracks on Dub Mission under the album Love Dub So. How did you work on this? Was this just remastering of some old stuff, or how did that come about?
That was my friend Jasper at Dub Mission, and I'd released a couple of tracks on their compilation albums, like single tracks. And Jasper knew that I had tracks that I'd been working on that I'd played to him that had never found a home really, or had never been out anywhere else. Didn't fit really anywhere else. And I just had them kind of in the in a drawer somewhere. They didn't really have a home to go to. So eventually he was like, well, if we collect this and this and this together, we'll have enough for an album. So really it was coming from his, he had the concept for that. He was like, I think we can put together a good little collection here of your tracks that haven't been out elsewhere, and maybe different mixes of tracks that had been previously released, like the Skunked on Planet Dub and Bubba We Love Dub So. And yeah, it just was a little collecting together some miscellaneous tracks that all had roughly this, could all live side by side more or less on an album and didn't have a home really elsewhere. Yeah, so thanks to Jasper for coming up with the idea for that one.
And then you followed up with a couple of self-released EPs under the title Holding Space. I think there was 4 of them. Can you tell a little bit about those? What was the intention for those? Are those also following in the line of this kind of healing music, but more electronic ambient?
Yeah, so exactly. So those Holding Space ones came out of the Canna sessions. So the music for the Canna album got written like probably quicker than almost any other album that I had. I think that album was written in 2 days. It was something like that. I mean, at least written. I mean, it took a lot of those tracks were played more or less live and then minimally kind of edited down afterwards to try to stitch together a track that kind of was coherent. But they really came out of kind of jam sessions. And when I was in my little studio in Ibiza, and my partner at the time was going through a kind of shamanic healing session elsewhere in the house, and I was feeling the vibes coming through into the studio, this like sense of like stillness and healing, and just sat there and played out this stuff, kind of trying to channel a bit of that feeling into the music. And so the Holding Space came out of some of those jams that were happening at that same time. And I thought I wanted to do, the idea of the Holding Space was to extend those tracks out to like hour-long versions. So really to use for something like bodywork. The idea was that you could put one of those tracks on, it would be there doing its thing, and nothing was going to freak you out, basically. It wasn't going to suddenly change direction after 10 minutes, or it was just, you could put it on and you could be confident that the vibe you had in the first 5 minutes was just going to continue. And so it was going to hold space for you, basically. It was going to create that vibe, and it was, you could have that as like an hour-long thing to use for whatever you'd like to use that for, whether you're sitting at home meditating, or you're doing body work, or you just want to put something on in the background that's going to chill, and it's going to stay chill, and you're not going to have to get up and like change the track because it's gone into some area where it's like taking you on a journey you didn't want to go on, basically. So it's just going to hold that space for you. So a couple of times I did, having done those hour-long tracks when I had bodywork sessions myself, massage sessions done for me, where normally there'd be a playlist, maybe over an hour, and I would use those long tracks for my own, as when I was receiving kind of bodywork sessions. And it was really interesting. Like, I would completely lose track of time in those sessions, because when you have a playlist and each track's like 5, 7, 10 minutes, it's kind of marking time for you through the session, and you more or less know, well, I've listened to 5, 6 tracks now, so probably we're coming to the end of the hour. And, but when there's just one track that doesn't change and it's just holding that extended moment, I would have no idea. Like, has it been 10 minutes? Has it been half an hour? Has it been like nearly, it was just, became like this timeless moment that was super, super interesting to be experiencing that. So that's when those tracks were working for me in the way that I intended them to work for other people. But I don't know really if those tracks were interesting for other people particularly, but it was an interesting little project for me to try to do something really long form, like an hour long.
Then in recent years, so in 2023, you had two albums. One of them is The Ambient Picnic, and the other one is Encore Volume 1. So let's start with The Ambient Picnic, which is an excellent collection of downtempo ambient tunes, but this time they do have beats. So what was your vision for this album?
I had been doing a internet radio show on for my local community radio here in the UK. I was living in the UK at this time, and my local community was trying to start up an internet radio show called Wild Heart, which was an internet radio station, I should say, to try to get funding to actually produce like a radio station, a community radio station. So they started online and they were asking people to contribute. So I was doing 2 shows a week for that at the time, and one of them was the Forest Fandango, which was my eclectic music selection. Like it was an hour-long show where I was just playing music that I had grown up with and loved, and it could be no rules at all. It could be anything. So all those shows are now posted on my YouTube channel, actually, that anyone can go and listen to. It's 24-hour-long shows. But I was also doing another show for them called The Ambient Picnic, which was an hour-long ambient mix. So no words, just pure music all the way through, mixed together, electronic ambient. And I did quite a few of those as well. And then at the same time, I was producing down-tempo stuff, but without really any concept of making a collection. Like there were a couple of those tracks had been around since the Tawai days, that they'd been cues that didn't get used on the Tawai soundtrack, but I thought might still have something usable and worth going back to in them. And then a couple others were just, music that I was doing a lot of meditation, I suppose you'd say. I was doing some more healing work on myself, and again, kind of the ambient music was the music that was expressing a lot of, the place where I was at. The more like beatless, let's say the beatless ambient stuff, like post meditation states, post healing sessions, trying to express something about what I was feeling was coming out as ambient music. And eventually I figured I had enough to put a collection, an album together. And so the name Ambient Picnic came from the radio show, which I'd been doing, which I'd stopped doing by that point, because it felt like a bit of a picnic, like sampling lots of different things to make a meal together, but things which maybe different people had brought to the picnic, and it was not necessarily one, an album that was conceptualized beforehand, like I'm going to do this. It was more like bits and bobs and tracks that I had around and had been making without a clear idea where they were, what they would be used for. Eventually went into this, into the picnic basket, let's say, and became, that Ambient Picnic album.
And another album of the same year was the Encore Volume 1, or the New Church of Acid, which is kind of an interesting mix of classic acid house vibes with more ambient kind of soundscapes. And I think you succeeded to mix the two very well, because it's chilled out, but there is also really a sort of danceable beat there. So there is this classic acid house vibe all there, but all the tracks are kind of a little journey on their own. So what can you tell us about this one? And does the Volume 1 suffix suggest there could be more of this?
It does. That's an album that did have a clear concept behind it. I've always loved that acid house sound. I've always loved the 303 sound. I have a couple in my studio. I just love that sound. I don't think, for me, it's not a played out sound. It's like it's a sound that is personally evocative of my younger days and the excitement I first felt of getting into electronic music and dance music, listening to the early, Chicago acid house sounds in the late 80s. The really early stuff, that acid sound was, I can still remember the excitement of that. And then that was a thread that continued through the Goa trance sound. Like a lot of tracks had 303s in some way, kind of, and obviously there was a acid techno genres, like the sound, like it's not trance, but coming out of Belgium, a lot of European artists producing like awesome acid techno that I would play in Goa sets. Like that was definitely a big sound for me, dance floor sound. So in my more, advanced years, down tempo kind of thing, I was like, I really wanted to do something with that sound that was crossed with kind of ambient somehow. So the idea was to kind of have a dance floor album that you would listen to on the sofa. Like you would like tap your foot, like, maybe you'd have your eyes closed. Maybe after a party, maybe you've come home and you just want to like listen to something, but it's not like blasting. Something that fit in that like niche. And that was the idea. And then, so none of those tracks really had existed previous to that idea, but it took a while to bring those tracks together, and there was a lot of going back and remixing stuff. It probably took 3 or 4 years of like doing mixes, leaving them alone, going back 6 months later, doing some more, leaving. I almost got released at one point on the 10 Kilo label, the Tip like sub label, I think. Or maybe it was even post 10 Kilo. It was something Rich was doing anyway, that he was like interested at one point, but then it didn't happen. He didn't really fit with the label, get released. I think I might have put them up online in an early version at some point and then taken them down again on my Bandcamp. So they went through a bit of an evolution, those tracks, to finally reach the place where they ended up. But of all the stuff that I've done in the last, 10 years or so, I think that's could be like for me the most successful. Like that's when I go back and I listen to those tracks now, I'm like, I love those tracks. I think they definitely have got, I know they're not dance floor friendly as such, but although at ZNA 2 years ago, I also had a 2-hour set in the chill out area at Sunset, and I played a lot of those Ankoa tracks, and they just were perfect for that moment. Like it was a chill out, but people were dancing, they found their time to shine, those tracks. So I'm super proud of those. And there is a volume 2, which is done, actually. There's another 6 tracks in a similar style. It's Ankoa volume 2. So it's a continuation of the first one. And I'm just really waiting for the cover art to be done. So my super talented cousin, Jake, who did the cover image for the first Ankoa, he's working on the cover for this second collection, and once that's done, it'll be ready to go, hopefully before the end of the year. But the music's all done, so yeah. Well, I look forward to you guys hearing it.
Will there be also a vinyl release of this one as well?
That's a good question. I would love to do a vinyl release. Yeah. The vinyl, I did a small run of the vinyl for the first one, which sold out. That was a small run, but it was a lot of work. it's just me sending them out. So it was a lot of packing up records and mailing them out to people, printing labels, and just me dealing with it all was a lot of work. And so I would love to do a vinyl run of this new one, like a similar probably a similar amount, just do 100 copies or so, and that's manageable. But more than that, it would be just without hiring someone else to help me ship all that stuff out. It would be just too much to take on, and I mean, there's no money in it, so I can't. There's no money to hire anyone to help me send them out, so it's down to me to do it. But I would love to do a limited vinyl run of the second one, and I do plan to do that. Yeah.
And which is your favorite Doof track and your favorite downtempo track that you created?
Oh. And I didn't give that any. Yeah, I didn't give that any thought beforehand. Oh, it's a tough one. Would have to be something off the first album. Maybe Let's Turn On, because it was the first track that I really felt like something, could be taken seriously, let's say, of the electronic music that I'd been doing up to that point. That was one that was like, it felt like it was a force to be reckoned with. And that was a super exciting time, like to feel like, yeah, this could actually be something. So for that reason, yeah, maybe Let's Turn On. And then the down tempo. Oh, that's a harder question to answer. Maybe something off that Third Ear album, the Sleeping Giant track. I have a really soft spot for. That's a favorite for sure. Or off the Ankoa, the Acid Test track, or the first one actually, the New Church of Acid track, the first track on that album.
So we mentioned your gig at ZNA last year a couple of times already, and if I'm not mistaken, there is another live performance scheduled for next year, the next edition of ZNA.
Yeah, next year. That's right. 30 years anniversary of Let's Turn On release in 1996 to 2026.
Yeah, how was your experience? You already told a little bit about the first edition, and what can we expect next year?
Right. Well, I had a great time, and I really enjoyed CNA, and I really love what they're trying to do of keeping the Goa trance sound alive for a new generation. Really, I met a lot of people there, younger generation who loved that Goa trance sound, and that was like super inspiring and super nice to see that it wasn't just us old guys from the 90s into that, but there was a whole younger generation who could appreciate that music. And I think it's great that CNA are trying to give a platform for that music to be played, and to give 90s guys like myself a place to do that. And I mean, it's ironic because for years I turned down their invitation because I don't perform as Doof anymore, and I wasn't really that interested to do that. It wasn't really where my musical interests were. But bless them, they kept inviting me back. And then a couple of years before the show that I played, I had other friends who'd been telling me that I should go. And they're like, yeah, we played there. It's great. You're going to love it. If he invites you back, you really should accept the invitation. And so that's what happened. I thought I'll give it a shot. And I just had the best time. I thought it was great. And then, so I thought at the time that might be a one-off. Maybe I'll just go and do that once. I mean, it was super fun to be there with my son, who was 13 then, and had never seen me like play to a festival crowd like that, because the dance floor in Siena, it's wild, man. I mean, the energy is just like, you know, it's stellar. It's like awesome dance floor. And so it was fun for him to see his dad, you know, play to this like incredible crowd and just have some experience of what it was that I used to do more regularly. And he was like, wow, it's like, you know, I mean, I'm just his old dad, you know, like around the house, but suddenly there's like all these people super excited, and he was like, I've never seen this before. So that was fun to go with him. But then like next year it's 30 years, man. 30 years since Let's Turn On. So, and ZNA were kind enough to invite me back, and I thought, there was no way really I could turn that down. And it's you know, I'm super excited that that's the show that I'm going to be celebrating that anniversary of Let's Turn On. Seems like the perfect place to do it. There's nowhere else I'd rather be doing that, and so I'm super excited to go back. And yeah, I mean, for the first show I had gone back and actually I did quite a bit of preparation, like re-editing tracks or editing together like other mixes, or I wanted to present something that would sound a little bit fresh to people who knew those old tracks, and also keep it interesting for me. And that was fine. But then there were a few people who were like, well, yeah, we really wanted to hear those tracks just like as they are in their original versions, you know. So I think going back next time, probably I won't try and be too clever about it, and I will just play the old tracks as they are from the album, and maybe even, you know, present the album and kind of give those original tracks from 1996, give them an airing again. I think last time as well, a few people said there was some, unfortunately, there were problems with the sound system when I played, technical problems with the sound system. So a few people had said afterwards, oh, it wasn't loud enough. You know, you need to turn it up next time. I mean, unfortunately, everything was where I was up on stage with the mixer. Everything was completely maxed out, but I think there were some problems with the sound system. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, next year that it's going to fully blast at full sound levels, and people get to enjoy those old tracks again one more time on the dance floor. And there are some other things planned for the anniversary year as well, with Dat Records, who, you know, we're re-releasing. So we've got some things planned to mark the occasion of the 30-year anniversary of that original Doof album.
Thanks to Nick for these massive interviews. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Till the next one, cheers.
Thanks for listening, people. If you enjoyed the podcast, hit the like button and be sure to subscribe and share the show. If you have any ideas, questions, leave a comment or message us on Facebook.